It was just after midnight on January 18, 1978, at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, when the kind of night every serviceman hopes for seemed to be unfolding. Quiet, uneventful, and routine, the base was wrapped in stillness, the kind of silence broken only by the occasional hum of generators and the steady crunch of boots across gravel during patrols. The security police stationed at the base had no reason to expect that within hours they would become central witnesses in one of the strangest and most controversial UFO incidents in U.S. military history. For men on night duty, the hours between midnight and dawn were often the hardest. The adrenaline of the day was gone, fatigue lingered in every movement, and the sharp cold of a New Jersey winter made each breath visible in the dark. Most of the airmen leaned on routine to stay alert, radio checks, perimeter walks, and idle conversations about family or upcoming leave. The airstrip was clear, the skies looked calm, and the only unusual thing was how ordinary everything felt. But beneath that calm, something unprecedented was about to unfold. Shortly after 2 a.m., a faint crackle broke the steady hum of the radio network. Dispatchers at Fort Dix, the adjoining Army installation, reported something unusual, a fast-moving aerial object entering restricted military airspace. At first, the men assumed it was a misread blip on the radar, perhaps a civilian aircraft straying off course. But the urgency in the voice over the radio made it clear this was no simple radar glitch. Unidentified aerial contact, approaching low altitude. The message repeated, sharper this time, with a tension that immediately unsettled the guards listening in. At McGuire, several security police stepped out from their posts, eyes scanning the sky. Some described seeing faint blue, white lights flickering far above, moving with irregular speed, darting in a way no conventional plane could. What unsettled them most was the object's ability to stop suddenly, then accelerate in a blink, behavior unheard of for any jet or helicopter. Within minutes, the entire security detail at McGuire was on alert. Calls buzzed back and forth between Fort Dix and McGuire, confirming sightings. Some men at Fort Dix reported that the object appeared to descend closer to the ground, crossing into restricted military property. Soldiers were instructed to secure the perimeter. To the men on the ground, it felt like the invisible line between ordinary duty and something out of science fiction had just been crossed. Those who saw the lights firsthand later described an eerie silence that accompanied the phenomenon. Unlike a jet that roared overhead or a helicopter that rattled the air, this craft seemed to glide noiselessly. The absence of familiar sound made the scene even more unsettling. The base, usually dominated by predictable rhythms, engines, radios, the distant bark of orders, was now pierced by an inexplicable quiet. According to testimony from servicemen who later broke their silence, the incident became even more disturbing. Reports from Fort Dix claimed that a small figure, described as humanoid in shape but not human, was seen moving near a patrol car. One officer allegedly discharged his weapon, and the figure fled toward the boundary line separating Fort Dix and McGuire. Within minutes, the being was spotted collapsing on the runway at McGuire Air Base. Panic spread quickly. Armed personnel were ordered to surround the body, while communications officers tried to make sense of what had just occurred. Witnesses recalled the strangeness of the figure's form, small, fragile, and nothing like the soldiers around it. The glowing lights in the sky had disappeared, leaving behind this baffling aftermath. For the men who stood watch that night, the sense of reality itself seemed to shift. Everything they had trained for, handling intruders, securing perimeters, maintaining discipline, suddenly seemed inadequate. What protocol existed for this? Who could they call? The tension was magnified by the knowledge that every action, every word spoken on the radio, was being recorded and monitored. Some of the younger soldiers admitted years later that their first reaction was fear, not just of what they had seen, but of what would happen to them for being witnesses. Military life thrived on order, and this was chaos. Speaking out of turn could mean punishment, yet silence in the face of what they saw felt almost impossible. Not long after the figure was secured, higher-ranking officials arrived. Trucks and recovery teams rolled into the area, their headlights cutting through the dark. The men on guard were ordered to step back, maintain their positions, and let the specialists take over. What struck many was the speed of the response, almost as if someone had been expecting this. By 4 a.m., most of the visible evidence was gone. The runway had been cleared, the area sanitized, and the incident officially locked away behind closed doors. By dawn, the men were told to prepare their reports carefully, sticking to acceptable language. The official explanation, they would later learn, would have nothing to do with what they had witnessed. In that one chaotic night, ordinary servicemen at McGuire found themselves swept into a story far larger than they could comprehend. For some, it became a memory they buried deep, fearful of the consequences of speaking out. For others, it became a burden they eventually shared, knowing the risk but believing the truth was more important. Looking back, what made that night so significant wasn't just the strange lights or the mysterious figure. It was the moment when ordinary men were forced to confront the unknown, and then asked to pretend it had never happened. The chaos of that night wasn't just in the sky above or the runway below. It lived inside the minds of those who witnessed it, leaving them forever changed. The night of January 18, 1978 had already spiraled out of control at McGuire Air Force Base. Strange lights in the sky, frantic radio chatter, and the unthinkable report from Fort Dix of a small humanoid figure had pushed routine military duty into the realm of the extraordinary. But nothing prepared the men for what happened. Next, the alleged crash on the runway, a moment that would mark the incident forever. According to testimony later shared by Air Force Police Officer Sergeant Jeff Morse and other unnamed witnesses, the chaos began a few miles away at Fort Dix, the adjoining Army base. A military policeman on patrol reportedly encountered a being unlike anything he had ever seen. Descriptions varied slightly, but most agreed it was short in stature, thin, and moved with unusual agility. Startled, the MP demanded it stop. When the figure did not comply, the officer drew his sidearm and fired. The being staggered, appeared injured, and then ran toward the boundary fence dividing Fort Dix from McGuire. By this time, the glowing object that had haunted the skies had vanished. To some, it seemed the figure had been abandoned or left behind by whatever craft had been flying overhead. Within minutes, security personnel at McGuire Air Force Base spotted movement at the far end of the runway. Under the harsh floodlights, they could make out a small form, struggling to move. Some swore they saw it stumble, pause, and collapse as if its strength had given out. When guards approached, weapons drawn, they discovered the figure lying motionless. It was unlike anything they had seen before. Witnesses later described its skin as grayish or bluish in tone, with a frail body that seemed far too delicate for the environment. It was clear the being was not a human soldier. This discovery shocked the airmen. Many were trained to expect the unexpected in terms of espionage or intrusions, but this defied logic. The moment felt surreal, as though the line between reality and fiction had suddenly blurred. The silence around the fallen figure was overwhelming, broken only by the nervous breaths of the soldiers and the crackle of radios calling in reinforcements. The base commander was quickly informed, and within minutes, orders were given to secure the area completely. Military police formed a perimeter around the runway, blocking access from anyone without explicit clearance. Trucks arrived carrying specialized teams who seemed disturbingly prepared for such a recovery. Witnesses reported that the recovery unit wore protective gear, unlike the ordinary uniforms of the base guards. They carried strange equipment and, with practiced precision, placed the figure into a lead-lined container, as though they already knew what they were dealing with. The choice of containment raised unsettling questions. Was the being dangerous, radioactive, or biologically hazardous? Or was this just part of a protocol the public was never supposed to know existed? For the young servicemen who had witnessed the scene unfold, the air was thick with questions. Some whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had seen. Was this really an extraterrestrial being? Could it have been some classified experiment gone wrong? Yet the one thing they all agreed on was that this was no ordinary intruder. Its form, its collapse, and the frantic but calculated response of the military recovery team convinced them that the higher-ups knew more than they let on. As dawn neared, the body was gone, transported off the base under heavy security, soldiers who had been present were gathered and debriefed. According to later testimony, they were explicitly warned never to discuss what they had seen. Some were threatened with court-martial. Others were told that speaking about the incident could cost them their careers, or worse. The official explanation issued in reports was bland and predictable. An unauthorized test object had caused confusion during the night. No mention was made of the figure, the crash, or the recovery team. To the world outside McGuire, nothing extraordinary had happened, but inside the hearts of those who stood on that runway, the truth burned like a scar. Years later, some of the witnesses began to talk. Sergeant Jeff Morse, in particular, shared details of what he had seen that night, insisting that the event was real and that the government had gone to great lengths to erase it. His courage gave weight to the story, but it also put him at risk. Skeptics attacked his credibility, while believers saw him as a vital whistleblower. For Morse and others, the memory of the fallen figure on the runway remained vivid. They described not just the sight of it, but the feeling, a mixture of awe, dread, and disbelief. The realization that something far beyond human understanding had collapsed on their watch was both terrifying and humbling. The crash on the runway at McGuire was more than just a bizarre military mystery. It symbolized the clash between ordinary servicemen and extraordinary secrets. The men on duty that night were not generals or politicians. They were ordinary guards thrust into a reality-altering experience. Their silence, enforced by fear, reveals the heavy weight of secrecy in military culture. And yet, their eventual testimonies, given despite risk, speak to the resilience of truth. Whether one believes the being was extraterrestrial or something else entirely, the courage of those who bore witness is undeniable. For those men, the image of the collapsed figure on the runway remains frozen in memory. The floodlights glaring down, the shadows stretching across the tarmac, the strange stillness that filled the night. It all became part of a story the government wished to bury. But the more one tries to erase a truth, the more it lingers in whispers, rumors, and testimonies that refuse to disappear. The crash at McGuire is one such truth, a story that survives not because it was recorded in official files, but because human beings who lived it refused to let it die in silence. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the skies above McGuire Air Force Base, the runway that had been the stage of the extraordinary was eerily silent again. The figure that had collapsed in the floodlights was gone, loaded into a secure container and whisked away by a recovery team that seemed far too well prepared for such a surprise. For the men who had stood guard that night, the most surreal part of the event was not the UFO in the sky or the strange being on the ground. It was what came next. The cover-up began with the efficiency of a machine that had been well oiled for decades. Not long after the recovery trucks disappeared into the darkness, soldiers at McGuire were ordered to assemble for debriefing. The tired, shaken airmen were ushered into a secure room where senior officers, some of whom they had never seen before, waited with grim expressions. The atmosphere was tense, and the message was clear: whatever had happened that night was now classified. The instructions were delivered in clipped, military precision. They were to write official reports of their activities. But the wording had to be carefully chosen. No mention of lights in the sky, no description of a body on the runway. Instead, they were told to refer only to an unidentified intruder incident that was resolved without further threat. Anything beyond that would be considered a violation of orders. One soldier later recalled the pit in his stomach as he realized the truth was being erased in real time. The reports they were being forced to write were not records of what had happened. They were fabrications meant to overwrite the memory of the night. The orders were backed by more than just military authority. Witnesses recalled being warned of serious consequences should they speak out. Court-martial was mentioned. Careers would be destroyed. Some claimed they were even told their families could suffer if they chose to talk. For young servicemen barely out of their teens, the fear was overwhelming. They had sworn oaths of loyalty, and now that loyalty was being weaponized to ensure silence. To many, the message was unmistakable. You didn't see what you think you saw, and if you say otherwise, you'll regret it. The sense of dread was so heavy that some men refused to even whisper about the incident afterward. They carried the secret like a weight, a memory that became more unbearable precisely because it had to be denied. Meanwhile, specialized crews had moved in to clean the scene. Tire tracks from the recovery trucks were smoothed over. The stretch of runway, where the figure had collapsed, was scrubbed and resealed. Some servicemen swore that strange chemical solutions were sprayed across the tarmac as if to remove biological traces. Others said technicians collected soil samples, packaging them with the same precision as they had handled the body. By sunrise, the runway looked as though nothing unusual had ever happened. The neatness of it all, the way every trace was erased before daylight, sent chills through those who had been there. It was as if the entire event had been a hallucination. Only the memories of the gods proved otherwise. Later that day, word spread across the base in carefully controlled whispers. The official account of the night's events had been released. It was nothing more than a weather balloon test that had caused confusion. Others were told it was simply an intruder exercise to check base readiness. Both explanations were laughable to those who had stood on the runway, but they understood that laughing would be dangerous. The ease with which the narrative was constructed shocked many of them. If a weather balloon or a routine drill could be used to explain away what they had seen, what else could be hidden under such bland excuses? It was then that some realized this was not the first time the government had buried the truth, and it would not be the last. The cover-up was not just physical, it was psychological. Soldiers were encouraged to doubt themselves. They were told fatigue had made them exaggerate. They were reminded that night patrols often played tricks on the eyes. Subtle suggestions crept into conversations. Maybe the being on the runway had been nothing more than a stray animal or a shadow misinterpreted under stress. This gaslighting wore down many of the men. Over time, some convinced themselves that silence was safer not only for their careers, but for their sanity. Others held fast to the truth, but the isolation of knowing what they could never say aloud gnawed at them for years. Despite the heavy blanket of secrecy, rumors leaked. Airmen told trusted friends in hushed tones. A few shared fragments of the story when they left the service. Over the years, bits and pieces surfaced, enough to suggest that something extraordinary had indeed happened at McGuire. But for every witness who spoke, there were many more who kept silent, either out of fear or out of loyalty to their oaths. The cover-up was effective, not because the truth could not be told, but because most people never dared to tell it. The McGuire incident offers a glimpse into how governments handle events they cannot explain. Layers of authority, rapid deployment of specialized teams, rehearsed cover stories, threats of punishment, all of it operated like a well-rehearsed play. The men on the ground were merely actors forced into silence, while the script was written by those higher up. It wasn't just about hiding a UFO or a body, it was about maintaining control. Admitting what had happened would have raised questions too big to answer. Where did the being come from? Why was it here? How much did the government already know? Instead of addressing those questions, it was easier to erase the entire night. For those who witnessed the incident, the cover-up was often more damaging than the event itself. Seeing a strange being collapse on a runway was shocking, yes, but being told to deny their own eyes, to lie in official reports, and to carry that lie for life left scars that never fully healed. Some, like Sergeant Jeff Morse, eventually chose to speak, risking ridicule and punishment to tell what they believed was the truth. Others went to their graves silent, still bound by fear. Together, their silence and their whispers form a haunting reminder of how power can shape reality. The McGuire cover-up is more than just a story about UFOs. It is a story about truth and control. It reminds us that the most dangerous part of extraordinary events may not be the events themselves, but the way they are hidden, manipulated, and rewritten. When governments erase history, they are not just burying evidence. They are burying the voices of ordinary men who were there. Men who stood under floodlights and saw what should have been impossible. The cover-up was not only about secrecy, it was about silencing humanity's natural instinct to seek answers. And yet, decades later, the story persists. That persistence alone is proof that no cover-up, no matter how tight, can fully erase the truth. The morning after the McGuire Air Base incident, the base was quiet on the surface. Official reports had been filed, the runway sanitized, and the figure that had collapsed under the floodlights was gone without a trace. To outsiders, nothing unusual had happened. But for the men who had been there, the memory was impossible to erase. They had been threatened into silence, yet silence did not come easily. Over the years, some of them broke their oaths, whispering fragments of the truth, risking careers, reputations, and even safety to tell the world what they had seen. These were the eyewitnesses who refused to stay silent. At first, nearly everyone who had witnessed the events kept quiet. The threats delivered during the debriefing were clear and terrifying. Talk, and you risked your career, your pension, and your future. In some cases, soldiers believed their families could be endangered. For many, the weight of those warnings was heavier than the truth they carried. But silence has a cost. The men found themselves replaying the night in their minds, haunted by the image of the strange being on the runway and the unnatural lights in the sky. Some convinced themselves that they had imagined it, the result of fatigue and stress. Others held on stubbornly to what they knew they had seen. The longer the silence stretched, the more unbearable it became. For a few, the truth could not remain hidden forever. One of the most important voices to emerge from the shadows was Sergeant Jeff Morse, an Air Force police officer stationed at McGuire that night. Years later, Morse began to speak about what he had witnessed, cautiously at first, and then with more detail as he realized how important his testimony was. Morse described the strange lights overhead, the communication with Fort Dix about a humanoid figure, and the collapse of that figure on McGuire's runway. He confirmed that he had seen the recovery team arrive and remove the body in a lead-lined container. He even remembered the chilling orders given to those on duty. Forget everything and never speak of it again. His account matched the fragments whispered by others. The consistency of the details gave his words credibility. While skeptics dismissed him as a conspiracy theorist, others saw in him the courage of a man unwilling to let the truth be buried with him. For Morse and others like him, telling the story came at a high price. Once he began to speak publicly, his military credibility was questioned. Detractors accused him of fabricating the event for attention. Friends distanced themselves, fearing association with what was considered fringe or crazy. And yet, despite the ridicule Morse pressed on, he believed that the world deserved to know what had happened that night. That humanity had been confronted with something extraordinary, and the truth had been stolen from the people by secrecy. His persistence became a beacon for other veterans who had stayed silent for too long. While Morse was the most prominent, he was not alone. Over the years, other servicemen who had been at McGuire or Fort Dix began to speak in bits and pieces. Some only told their families, sharing the story on their deathbeds. Others gave anonymous interviews to researchers, protecting their identities while ensuring their voices were heard. Their accounts lined up in eerie ways. They spoke of the humanoid figure, of the rushed recovery, of the way officials shut down conversation with threats. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle, strengthening the sense that what happened at McGuire was real, and that the government had worked very hard to bury it. What drove these men to risk so much? The answer, in many cases, was conscience. For years, they had lived with the knowledge of what they had seen, and the silence ate at them. Some described a deep sense of betrayal, that the very government they served had forced them to lie about an event that had shaken them to their core. Others spoke out because they wanted their children, or future generations, to know the truth. They felt that humanity had been denied knowledge that could reshape our understanding of the universe. For them, the lie was too large to carry to the grave. The eyewitnesses who spoke gave researchers and historians something invaluable first-hand accounts. Without them, the McGuire incident would have been nothing more than rumor. Their testimonies breathed life into the whispers, turning speculation into documented memory. Every story shared added pressure against the wall of secrecy. Even when officials scoffed, the consistency of the accounts forced people to pay attention. And while skeptics argued that memory could be flawed, others pointed out that these were trained servicemen, men who had been conditioned to observe carefully, follow orders, and record details. Their words carried weight. What makes the eyewitnesses remarkable is not just that they spoke, but that they did so knowing the backlash they would face. They risked being mocked by the public, disbelieved by officials, and alienated from their peers. They knew their reputations might never recover. Yet they chose to speak anyway. Their courage is a reminder that truth is often carried forward not by the powerful, but by ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. In this case, it was airmen and guards, men who had simply been doing their jobs when history landed on their runway. Today, the McGuire Air Base incident is still debated. Skeptics dismiss it as myth, while believers point to the eyewitnesses as proof that something extraordinary took place. Regardless of where one stands, the fact that these men came forward at all is significant. Their voices cut through the fog of secrecy. They remind us that history is not only written by officials, but also by those who dare to contradict the official story. Without their testimonies, the McGuire incident might have disappeared completely into classified files. With them, it lives on as one of the most intriguing UFO cases in U.S. history. The eyewitnesses who refused to stay silent left us with more than just a story about UFOs. They left us a lesson in courage. They showed that even in the face of fear, ridicule, and the machinery of government secrecy, the truth can survive, if people are willing to risk everything to speak it. Their voices remind us that history belongs not to those who control the narrative, but to those who refuse to let the truth be buried. The McGuire Air Base incident of 1978 is surrounded by mystery, strange lights in the sky, a humanoid figure collapsing on a runway, recovery teams moving with practiced precision, and an immediate cover-up that silenced those who knew the truth. But beyond the details of what exactly happened that night lies a bigger question. Why does the truth matter? It matters because the story of McGuire is not just about UFOs or extraterrestrial encounters. It is about the relationship between truth and secrecy, about the choices governments make in the shadows, and about the courage of ordinary people who refuse to let lies define history. Every government relies on trust. Citizens give their loyalty, their service, and in the case of soldiers, sometimes their very lives. In return, they expect honesty, transparency, and respect. When events like McGuire are hidden behind false reports and threats of silence, that trust begins to crumble. The servicemen who stood on the runway that night were not conspiracy theorists or thrill seekers. They were professionals doing their jobs. They expected that their observations would be valued and taken seriously. Instead, they were told to deny their own eyes and replace their memories with official lies. That betrayal cut deeper than the event itself. Truth matters because without it, trust erodes. And once trust between people and their government is broken, it is nearly impossible to restore. Secrecy has its place in military operations, but when secrecy is used not to protect people, but to control them, it becomes dangerous. The McGuire incident was buried under layers of classification, sanitized reports, and denial. Officials decided that ordinary citizens could not handle the truth, but secrecy breeds suspicion. It invites rumors, misinformation, and paranoia. When people know they are being lied to, they stop believing anything they are told. In the long run, hiding the truth creates more chaos than revealing it ever could. The McGuire cover-up matters because it demonstrates how quickly the machinery of secrecy can be turned against those who deserve honesty. And it reminds us that transparency is not just a virtue, it is a safeguard against tyranny. Why does the truth matter? Because courage depends on it. The eyewitnesses who later broke their silence, like Sergeant Jeff Morse, did so at great personal cost. They knew their reputations would suffer, that skeptics would mock them, and that officials might retaliate. Yet they chose to speak, because they understood something profound. When truth is buried, courage is meaningless. Their voices became a form of resistance against silence, proof that even the most powerful cover-up cannot erase reality if enough people are willing to carry it forward. The courage of those men matters because it inspires others to do the same. Each act of truth-telling builds a legacy of resistance against secrecy. The McGuire incident forces us to confront deeper questions about ourselves. What if the being on the runway was not from Earth? What if the lights in the sky represented technology far beyond our own? How would humanity change if such truths were openly acknowledged? The answers to those questions may be unsettling, but they are also essential. Truth matters because it shapes our collective identity. If we are not told the full story of our place in the universe, then we are denied the chance to grow, to adapt, and to rise to the challenges of discovery. By hiding the truth, officials did not just cover up an incident, they stole from humanity the chance to know itself more fully. The McGuire story is not just about 1978, it is about today. In an age where misinformation spreads instantly and trust in institutions is fragile, the need for truth has never been greater. If we allow lies to stand unchallenged, we weaken the very foundation of society. Truth matters because it protects us from manipulation. It allows us to make informed choices. It keeps power accountable. Without truth, democracy itself becomes a hollow promise. The eyewitnesses of McGuire understood this, even if they could not always articulate it. Their insistence on telling what they saw was not just about UFOs. It was about refusing to live in a world where silence is forced and reality is rewritten. When governments lie, it is not just facts that are buried, it is people. The men at McGuire carried scars not only from what they saw, but from the demand that they deny it. Some struggled with guilt, others with self-doubt. A few spent their lives afraid of what would happen if they spoke. Truth matters because lies wound the human spirit. They force people to live in conflict with their own memories, to question their sanity, and to bury their integrity. For those men, the cover-up was not just a matter of policy, it was a personal violation of their honor. The McGuire incident, like so many other stories buried under secrecy, is a call to action. It challenges us to demand transparency, to question official narratives, and to protect the voices of those who dare to speak against silence. Truth matters because without it, history is stolen. Events that could inspire and unite us are instead erased or distorted. By seeking truth, we reclaim our right to know, to grow, and to imagine a future that is not built on deception. Ultimately, the truth matters because it is the only foundation on which trust, courage, and progress can be built. The McGuire Air Base incident may remain shrouded in mystery, but the lesson it leaves us is crystal clear: truth is worth fighting for. The servicemen who stood on that runway were ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. Their decision to speak, even when forbidden, is a reminder that truth does not belong to governments or institutions. It belongs to humanity, and as long as there are people willing to carry it forward, no cover-up, no matter how powerful, can bury it forever. The McGuire Air Base incident of 1978 is more than just a mystery tucked away in military archives. It is more than strange lights in the sky or the story of a fallen figure on a runway. It is, at its core, a mirror, reflecting truths about secrecy, courage, and the human need for answers. Decades later, when we look back at McGuire, the real power of the story lies not only in what may have happened that night, but in what it means for us today. We live in an era defined by information. With a single click, billions of people can access knowledge that was once hidden behind closed doors. Yet paradoxically, misinformation and secrecy continue to shape our world. Governments still classify documents for decades, corporations still bury inconvenient facts, and powerful voices still rewrite history when it suits them. The McGuire incident reminds us that truth is not always given freely. It must be demanded, fought for, and defended. The men who witnessed the events that night were silenced by fear, but some eventually chose to speak. Their courage offers a timeless lesson. Truth survives only if people are willing to carry it forward. In every generation, there are individuals who refuse to let silence define them. At McGuire, servicemen like Sergeant Jeff Morse chose honesty over obedience. Today, whistleblowers in every field, government, business, media, face the same choice. Do they remain quiet for safety, or do they risk everything to ensure the truth sees the light? The message of McGuire is clear. When people choose courage, they expand the boundaries of freedom. Silence may protect institutions, but speech protects humanity. One of the most striking parts of the McGuire cover-up was the use of fear to enforce silence. Soldiers were told they would lose careers, reputations, or worse if they spoke. Fear was the chain that bound them. But here is the message for us today: fear loses its power when truth is spoken. Once witnesses began sharing their testimonies, the grip of secrecy weakened. Rumors became stories, stories became records, and those records now live on in history. In our world, where fear is often used as a tool of control, truth is the antidote. It frees individuals from the shadows and ensures that no power can erase reality forever. If McGuire happened today, the story might be very different. Soldiers would carry smartphones capable of recording video. Witnesses could post their accounts instantly to social media, bypassing official channels. The machinery of secrecy would still exist, but it would face a force officials in 1978 never anticipated: a global audience connected in real time. The message here is that we must use technology responsibly, not only for entertainment but as a safeguard for truth. Cameras, networks, and archives give ordinary people the tools to challenge silence. The lesson of McGuire is that truth must be preserved, and today we have more tools than ever to do it. Whether or not one believes the McGuire incident involved extraterrestrial life is, in some ways, secondary. What matters is the response. Ordinary servicemen were told to lie, to doubt themselves, to bury the truth. Some complied, others resisted. That tension is not unique to UFO stories. It is part of everyday life. We all face moments when we are asked to compromise truth for comfort, loyalty, or safety. The message of McGuire is that integrity matters. Choosing truth, even when it is dangerous or unpopular, is what defines character. The servicemen who eventually spoke gave us a blueprint for moral courage that we can all learn from. If the McGuire incident was truly an encounter with something beyond Earth, then its significance is staggering. It would mean humanity has already brushed against the greatest question of all: are we alone in the universe? If officials knew this and chose to hide it, they did not just bury evidence. They buried an opportunity for humanity to unite in wonder, curiosity, and discovery. But even if the incident was something else entirely, an experiment gone wrong or a misinterpreted event, the cover-up still matters, because the refusal to share truth robs people of their right to ask questions, to seek answers, and to grow. The bigger picture is this: the truth belongs to humanity, not to a select few in power. Today, discussions of UFOs, or as officials now call them, UAPs, so unidentified aerial phenomena, have returned to public attention. Governments have released declassified reports, and lawmakers have pressed for more transparency. But secrecy still lingers, and skepticism remains strong. The message of McGuire is a warning: if we allow truth to be buried again, we repeat the mistakes of the past. Transparency must be demanded, not requested. Citizens must hold institutions accountable. Otherwise, history will continue to be written in shadows. In the end, the McGuire incident is not just a story about UFOs. It is a story about people. About soldiers doing their jobs, about fear used as a weapon, and about courage slowly breaking through silence. The message for today is simple but powerful: truth matters, courage matters, and silence serves only those who wish to control. The men at McGuire may not have realized it in the moment, but by speaking later, they gave us more than a UFO story. They gave us a lesson in resilience. They proved that even the tightest cover-up cannot outlast the human need for honesty. Decades later, the runway at McGuire is quiet again, used for routine flights and training missions. The events of that January night are not written in any official manual, not carved into any monument. But they live on in testimony, in whispers, and in the courage of those who refuse to let the truth die. That is the message for today. Truth is fragile, but it endures. It endures in memory, in courage, and in the voices of those who refuse to be silenced. And as long as we protect it, history will never belong to secrecy. It will belong to all of us.